I'm Andrew Schwartz, and you're listening to The Truth of the Matter, a podcast by CSIS where we break down the top policy issues of the day and talk with the people that can help us best understand what's really going on. To get to the truth of the matter about negotiations between Russia and Ukraine and what's going on the ground in Ukraine, we have with us Emily Harding, who's Vice President of our Defense and Security Department. She's also Director of our Intelligence, National Security, and Technology Program. Emily, welcome.
Hey, Andrew, thanks.
So tell me, things are fluid, and we're talking on Thursday, May 1st. What's happening with the current status of Russia and Ukraine, and how did we get to where we are right now?
Yeah, rabbit, for a peaceful and good month ahead, I hope. So it's been a long 3 years of this conflict. We saw the Russians invade in 2022. We saw this amazing taking of territory, and then this fabulous Ukrainian counteroffensive to push the Russians way back from the front lines. The war now has settled into this strange combination of a war from last century and a war from next century. So what you have is old school trench warfare in a lot of ways, guys on the front line shooting artillery at each other. But then you also have a very modern war in that drones are defining the battlefield. So you have this weird space where there's no such thing as surprise. Drones have complete aerial surveillance. So anytime either one of the sides attempts to move forward, they're instantly spotted by a lot of the drone surveillance. And it's just way too easy to take out big mechanized divisions with the drone capabilities that we have. One of the amazing things that we saw while we were in Ukraine was we visited a factory that's creating some of these drones. And it was just amazing to see how fast they're turning them out, how agile and effective those drones are, and the kinds of capabilities that Ukraine has developed indigenously to really fight this fight on their terms.
Are they really leading in terms of, the drone war? Is this something entirely new, and is it something new that you're seeing out on the battlefield?
It is very new. In a lot of the recent conflicts, the U.S., for example, used drones quite a bit for surveillance in previous conflicts. But they were really big, high-altitude drones that were used for picking up signals or keeping eyes on a particular target. With this capability, you're looking at much smaller drones. I mean, the ones that we saw in the factory at Skyfall in Ukraine the big ones were the size of a big chair, basically. It could hold 15 kilograms of payload, and it could break through Russian front lines, get through electronic warfare capabilities, and cause a lot of havoc right behind the front lines. But those were the big ones. The small ones were the size of a dinner plate. I mean, they were tiny.
So and they have a box, like an Apple iPad or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. And you can turn them out for $300 a pop, and they cause amazing damage. We heard from various sources that drones are now causing between 70 and 80% of the casualties on the battlefield. That is an entirely new way of war.
Emily, that is absolutely fascinating. We're seeing this in real time. And, what do we think is next in terms of drones?
Yeah, I mean, the capabilities of these drones are improving day by day. There's been a real cat and mouse back and forth between the Russians and the Ukrainians. Some of it has been one step forward, two steps back. I mentioned Russian electronic warfare before, so they've gotten really good at intercepting the signal between the operator and the drone itself, capturing that drone, flying it over to Russian lines and taking it. Same thing with the Ukrainians. So they try to come up with countermeasures for that. One thing that's happened recently is a lot of fiber optic cables. So you have a drone that's actually tethered back to the operator by a tiny fiber optic cable. And you see pictures of the battlefield where it looks like these long spider webs, just glass cables that have been left behind by some of these drone capabilities. So where we're headed next, right now you could have, one operator flying one drone or maybe two operators flying 4 drones. I think what we're going to see in the next few years is the capability to do drone swarms. So the U.S. is moving towards the Collaborative Combat Aircraft, the CCA. But you'll see that where you have one master drone and then you have a whole bunch of other drones that are flying in a swarm that are really very difficult to combat.
Emily, I wonder about the drone operators. Do they feel like they're actually causing damage, killing people, hurting people, or is it more like they're playing a video game?
It's a weird combination of the two, and I think that's a quite astute question. We saw with a lot of the U.S. operators of drones that they would say things are both more separate because you're sitting in a distant place from the battlefield, and it does look like you're looking at things through a screen. But at the same time, it's very personal. It's almost like being a sniper because you're looking very closely at your target. You're even zooming in and maybe looking them in the face before you hit them. And that is a very personal form of warfare. The Ukrainians have leaned in quite a bit to mental health in addition to physical health recuperation for soldiers coming back from war. And that's going to be really important in the years to come. Also, we're seeing this sort of bifurcation of the battlefield where you have a group of kids, frankly, who are, 18 to 24-year-olds who are enlisting because they want to be part of the drone war capability. They have great skills developed from years of playing video games, frankly, and they know they can do this. So you have a younger cadre that's sitting behind the front lines and operating drones, and then you have an older cadre that's actually the ones on the literal front lines in the trenches shooting the artillery. And that's different. That's not the kind of thing we've seen before in a conflict. Usually it's reversed.
Yeah, so that's back to your beginning of this old, very old warfare, very new warfare.
Yep.
Absolutely fascinating. Tell me about the trip that you went on. Why did you go and what did you get out of it besides all the things you just told us, which are fascinating?
Yeah, so CSIS has this tremendous program. Part of our mission as an institution is to educate the public and to educate our policymakers. So we offer the opportunity for Congress and congressional staff to come on these experiential trips where you get to go out into the field, bipartisan basis, run by a nonpartisan research institution, to just sort of see what's going on out there. And our fabulous friends in our Congressional Affairs Office put together this amazing trip. We met with all kinds of high-ranking folks from the Ukrainian government, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of Defense, one of their intelligence services, the Prosecutor General's office, the anti-corruption folks. I mean, I could go on and on. It was an amazing trip. We also met with some civil society types, the UN humanitarian relief, and then a really fun trip out to go see the demining efforts, this organization called HALO. One sort of interesting tidbit from that, HALO has been attempting to clear mines from an area the size of Belgium. That is how much territory Russia took, mined, and then left. And so HALO is literally like walking through fields using metal detectors, trying to find little bits of metal that the Russians left behind that could kill a lot of people. They've leaned really hard on U.S. assistance to make that happen, in particular things like overhead imagery. And they have had that like turned off and turned back on again and turned off and turned back on again. And so they are really hoping that they can get a consistent set of assistance from the U.S. to be sure that they demine appropriately.
Yeah, it's incredibly dangerous work.
Yeah, it is. It's very dangerous.
Emily, I want to ask you about the Ukrainian people. How did you find them? What was the morale like? Did it feel safe to you? I'm sure some places felt really safe and others didn't feel as safe.
Absolutely. I've been to a lot of war zones. I'm one of those weird people who really thrives in a war zone. And, Ukraine felt like the most normal war zone I have ever been in. You walk around Odessa, you walk around Kyiv, you drive across Ukraine to get between the two. Everything's open. Businesses are open. The roads are full. There's people out planting and harvesting. There's transport moving goods around. In Kyiv, the bars are open. The restaurants are open. We went out for some amazing Ukrainian food in Kyiv. And then afterwards, there were all kinds of bars open where you could go grab a drink if you wanted to. The streets are full. I took this really fabulous picture of a family walking their kids to school, kids probably 6 or 7. And they were walking right in front of these big piles of sandbags and these, boarded up windows because life goes on. And the Ukrainians have made a very strategic decision to keep their economy pumping for the future. They're already looking ahead to the rebuilding. They want to be sure that when that rebuilding happens, they have the economic backbone to really reignite the Ukrainian economy and to keep their people moving forward. They are committed to winning this conflict in any way that they can.
I want to talk about the development and business in a second, but before I do, I want to ask you about the Ukrainian weapons stockpile. There's a lot of talk about that they might be running out, that if we don't continue to supply them, if the Europeans don't continue to, they're going to be in big trouble. What did you see there?
Yeah. So they are working very hard to build up an indigenous capacity, but it's hard. At the same time as you're fighting a war, it's really difficult to build the planes that you need to fight the war. So what they're doing is they're pulling from all kinds of different sources to put together this military. We have been one of those really important sources. They're at this moment right now where they're sort of questioning, I think for obvious reasons, the U.S. commitment to continue providing that kind of weaponry. So they're trying to bring things in-house. They're also buying as much as they can from the Europeans. One of the more shocking things that we heard while we were there was that the Europeans had just given them $40 billion to spend on weaponry, but the Europeans are tapped out. Like, their defense industrial base is pretty much done, and they're not making the things that Ukraine needs. So the Europeans said, here, take this money and go buy from the Americans. And they can't get us to sell them what they need right now, even though they're asking for it. And the only people that hurts are jobs here in the U.S. So Pennsylvania, where they make weapons, Arkansas, where they make weapons, Alabama, where they make weapons. Like, this is a great opportunity for U.S. businesses to sell things to the Ukrainians. But there's a lot of bureaucracy, there's a lot of politics in the way. My opinion is that it would be better for everybody if they get the weapons they need. They can then negotiate from a position of strength.
Let's talk about the negotiations. Today, we don't know exactly where the peace talks are, but what did you hear while you were there?
Yeah, so because of the group that we had with us, a whole bunch of congressional staff, this question happened a lot. What do you guys want out of a peace negotiation? What's realistic? And every high-level Ukrainian official we talked to gave us pretty much the same answer, with one interesting twist. The answers they gave us was that we want all of our territory back. We want a Ukraine whole and free. We want security guarantees. They, for very good historical reasons, do not trust the Russians to actually abide by an agreement. They fully expect that Russia's going to want to sign a peace deal and then come back 2 years later and finish what they started. They want the kids back. There are all kinds of reports of Ukrainian children being basically kidnapped from occupied areas and sent to live with families in Russia. They want all of the kids back. And then there's some economic pieces too. They want help with the rebuilding. They want to use some of the frozen Russian assets to rebuild. The interesting twist that we heard was about that territory piece. No Ukrainian is ever going to say, Russia can keep our territory. Again, very good historical reasons for that. If you go to a place like Bucha, where we went to see the mass grave and to see the horrible things that Russian occupiers did in the 2 weeks that they were there, you understand why, as a Ukrainian, you would be desperate to rescue your people from that kind of pain. But they did say that it may take time. It may take time to reunite all of Ukraine. And honestly, in my work on peace negotiations, time is always an underappreciated part of the process. Maybe something can't happen today, but you can play for time. We saw this with Iran and the JCPOA. Those bills are now coming due. But with Ukraine, you could really talk about how we're at ceasefire now, and we're going to work through the territorial piece over time as the situation changes.
Emily, as you're talking to senior officials there, as you're talking to senior officials here, what do they want the next steps to be?
They do want the war to end, but they want it to end in a sustainable way. And a big piece of that is the territory and the security guarantees. They also are really excited in kind of a surprising way about the potential for the future and turning towards Europe. They're working on their EU accession. We saw a bunch of EU flags up all over the place in Kyiv. They make the very good point that all of this military technology they've developed, that could be used to support European security, to support U.S. security. They're going to have a lot to contribute on the back end of this, both economically and technologically. The alternative to that is that if Russia wins, God forbid, or if Russia takes over a whole bunch more territory and Ukraine is not able to join the EU, all of that technology, all that capability goes east and goes to Russia and perhaps goes to China. And then we face it on the battlefield later in a way that we really don't want to do. So they're excited about the potential to be able to contribute to European security.
Can they sustain this for much longer without really serious U.S. support?
It gets much harder. It gets much harder. And this is where the art of military science comes in as opposed to the science of military science. The Ukrainians were underestimated very early in this war for not being able to fight, not having the capacity to fight, and then they did. I suspect that if the U.S. cut off all military assistance, Russia would make some serious gains on the battlefield. But the Ukrainians told us that they're going to keep fighting. They see this as an existential threat. You don't just stop fighting if it's an existential threat. So, I think they'll lose some ground. They'll lose a lot of people. They will keep fighting to the point that either they can't fight anymore or the situation changes so they can actually make some kind of sustainable peace. But without U.S. assistance in things like intelligence and especially air defense, they really need air defense. That gets much harder.
Emily, you mentioned before that there is a lot of business development things going on in Ukraine, and this is all hoping that this conflict will be resolved and peace will be sustainable. Are U.S. businesses on the ground there, and what are they doing, and what did you see while you were there?
Yeah, they're on the ground, but they're not on the ground enough. So we had a really wonderful discussion with the American Chamber of Commerce, the AmCham, over an amazing dinner at a place called La Maison. Fabulous place. Recommend it if you're ever in Kyiv. But the AmCham folks said that it's part of Ukrainian culture that they want to know that you're with them in the hard times and also in the good times. So they're looking at the businesses that are there now, and they're saying, okay, these are our partners for the future. American businesses, we have a lot of great strengths. We're also risk averse and very heavily lawyered. So it's difficult for some of these businesses to put people on the ground inside Ukraine when they don't know if there's going to be, for example, a big military presence like there was in Iraq to help do things like evacuate American citizens in a necessary time. So as a result, you have American companies that are coming in and then leaving, and then coming in and then leaving, as opposed to keeping a presence. There are some really important exceptions to that. We had a meeting with folks from Citibank, for example. They have been instrumental to keeping the economy moving inside Ukraine. The folks from Microsoft, they have been sitting side by side with the Ukrainian government trying to keep their systems up and running, to protect their energy grid, protect their data, to move it into the cloud so it's still there for them later. That kind of assistance has been vital to really keeping Ukraine alive and moving. I look forward to a day, frankly, when there can be all of these great partnerships between U.S. companies and Ukrainian companies. We're seeing a lot of energy in that space, Ukrainian companies coming here and talking about partnering. But those relationships are going to take time. They're going to take commitment.
Emily, what about this minerals deal that we keep hearing about? What's going on with that? And will it help?
I think it will help. It is some of those ties I was just talking about between Ukrainian business and U.S. business. And I asked the frankly very stupid and very basic question while I was there. So, this is great. There are all these minerals inside Ukraine. Why hasn't anybody exploited them up to now? And I got a very interesting answer to that question. Point one was that it's expensive. They're very deep, and trying to build the infrastructure is expensive. Technological know-how is a real restraint. So some of these things you couldn't have really made money off of them years ago because of where they are and how you have to extract them. But then the third point was fascinating. Apparently, there are a lot of these same minerals inside Russia. And the Russian companies that exploit minerals in Russia didn't want the competition from Ukraine. So every time somebody made a move to try to exploit the minerals in Ukraine, they would call on their pro-Russian politicians to shut it down. And that, I think, is going to be a real victory story out of this minerals deal. If U.S. companies can come in and U.S. companies can help them release this great wealth, and then we can get something out of it too, that's a win-win for everybody, and Russia loses, which would be great. So in that sense, I think it's a really positive development. I think we need to be patient with it. It's going to be like a 7 to 10 year process to actually get to some of this capability.
Emily, as always, so insightful. Really appreciate you coming back from Ukraine and telling us about everything you learned there. Thanks so much.
Yeah, the food was great. Go eat Ukrainian food. Thanks, Andrew.
If you enjoyed this podcast, check out our larger suite of CSIS podcasts. From Into Africa, The Asia Chessboard, China Power, AIDS 2020, The Trade Guys, Smart Women, Smart Power, and more. You can listen to them all on major streaming platforms like iTunes and Spotify. Visit csis.org/podcasts to see our full catalog.